Shalom, shalom, shalom. How y'all doing, everybody? Welcome back to the next session and section in this reading with SHILO edition, baby. It's SHILO. How y'all doing? Long day of homeschooling today. And I had to catch an escapee chicken. Hopefully I got all the his outs sealed up. But we'll see. We are back to get into the next section. The next section, which is section 4 of chapter 1, slavery, and on the real side by Mr. Mel Watkins. We came back last night and read section 3, and we're going to see if we can get through section 4, which is about 7 pages front and back, 14, if you count them one at a time. But we're going to take it one page at a time, one day at a time, and we're going to see what we can get into. So come on in. Sit down. Let's see if we can go ahead and try to push through these 7 pages for today so we can get to chapter 2. So, hey, if you don't like some of the words that's read, hey, that's not my problem. These are the words that are in the book. So I am just reading the book. If you don't like the words, it's not my fault. I'm just repeating what's here. So on the real side, the history of African American comedy from slavery to Chris Rock. And we are in chapter 1, which is called Slavery, section 4. Still, there was little chance that any but a few whites would have noted or recognized the serious underlying intent of slaves' activities, since the surface image of frolicking and irresponsible blacks more readily and conveniently suited white assumptions and purposes. Consequently, misinterpretation of slave behavior was commonplace. As Frederick Douglass wrote, "The remark is not infrequently made that slaves are the most contented and happy laborers in the world. They dance and sing and make all manner of joyful noises. So they do. But it is a great mistake to suppose them happy because they sing. The songs of the slave represents the sorrows rather than the joys of his heart. In the most boisterous outbursts of rapturous sentiment, there was ever a tinge of deep melancholy. Moreover, as slaves began to develop rudimentary facility with the language, naive malapropism was slowly but stealthily transformed into double entendre and self-consciousness. So like I said, some of these words, once I say them, I'll recognize them. But, a lot of these words I have not seen before. I might have heard them said, but not seen. My naive malapropism was slowly but stealthily transformed into double entendre and self-conscious, or willful ambiguity, assuming the more consciously manipulative, goal-directed, and sophisticated cast typical of European and indigenous African wordplay. This deliberate linguistic misdirection allowed slaves both to communicate surreptitiously with, let's see what that means, surreptitiously, under the cover of night. That's what I think it means. Surreptitiously. 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 Let me spell it. SHIREPTITIOUSLY. Hey, make sure you close that back door good, sons. Close it well. I'll come get it in just a second. Thank you. Surreptitious, secretive, or stealthy. And I was kind of correct. Under the cover of night. This deliberate linguistic misdirection allowed slaves both to communicate secretly or surreptitiously with one another and, without detection, express humorously some of the pent-up outrage resulting from their treatment as bondsmen. At the same time, maintaining the appearance of the naive was crucial as a survival technique, providing the perfect guise for aggressive humor and wit. Whereas a sullen slave might merely cause discomfort for a master, an impudent slave would most likely force slaveholders to inflict quick and severe punishment. From the opposite perspective, slaveholders clung to their image of the innocent, docile, childlike slave, even though that image was diametrically opposed to another prominent stereotype, that of the brutish, dangerously intractable savage. Now, this tandem of stereotypes may seem irrational, but racist categorizing has seldom been noted for its reasonability. My bad, I lost my place. There you go. In fact, the 11th, 12th, and 13th editions of the Encyclopedia Britannica, under the definition Negro, SIC, whatever that means, would later submit mentally the Negro is inferior to the white. Let's see if it's in here. Let me see. What edition is this? Encyclopedia America. I don't know which edition this is. Complete 30 volumes. This is the Encyclopedia America International Edition. Let's see what it has for Negroes. Negro in America, shit. Negritos, Negro. All of mankind is of the same genius, Homo, and the same species, sapiens. Any classification is therefore subspecific. Further breakdown is in terms of geographical or local races. Traditionally, anthropologists have recognized three basic stocks, each with subdivisions: Caucasoid or European or white, Mongoloid or Asiatic or yellow, Negroid or African or black. In recent years, other less clear-cut groups have been added. For example, Australoid, archaic white, American Indian, Polynesian. The basic homogeneity or unity of H sapiens or Homo sapiens is exemplified by the statement that there are approximately 44,000 pairs of genes for humans. Of these, 90% or 39,600 are shared in common, leaving 4,400 as racial. Of these, 50% or 2,200 are allowed for variation. Hence, only 2,200 pairs of genes may, in varying combinations, enter into hereditary differences of form and function in the peoples of the world. Physical traits. Negro refers originally and basically to the people of Africa. The word itself meaning black, referring to skin pigmentation. It is even likely that the Negroid type is indigenous to Africa, having arisen as an environmental adaptation to bright sunlight and intense heat. Yes, sir. Who did a backflip? Good, good, good. The physical traits may be stretched under the following heads: skin, hair, eyes, nose, lips, head, face, body, and structure. Well, so this is in the encyclopedia under Negro. And this encyclopedia was, whoo, man, it was copywritten in, and we got a couple of numbers, 1918. First published in 1829, man. That's crazy. I wonder if this was one of the ones that was published in 1829. I wonder. Anyway, let's get back to it. We might have to do a part one. We're going to see. I want to get through it. The mental constitution of the Negro is very similar to that of a child, normally good-natured and cheerful, but subject to sudden fits of emotion and passion during which he is capable of performing acts of singular atrocity. An important factor in slaveholders' zealous embrace of the naive, contented child stereotype was the need to allay concern and anxiety associated with the more insidious sphere of violent slave insurrection. Not to be sure because rebellion posed any real threat to the Old South or could not have been quickly and summarily thwarted, but because the carnage resulting from such mutiny might have severely curtailed the extremely profitable exploitation of the wageless workforce. Given their mindset, it is not inconceivable that many slaveholders would interpret the following story of Pompey and his master related in Peter Randolph's 1855 slave narrative, From Slave Cabin to Pulpit, and many similar tales as examples of black naivety instead of cutting satire. Pompey, how do I look? The master asked. Oh, master, mighty. You looks mighty. What do you mean, mighty, Pompey? Why, master, you looks noble. What do you mean by noble? Why, sir, you looks just like a lion. Why, Pompey, where have you ever seen a lion? I saw one down in yonder field the other day, master. Pompey, you foolish fellow, that was a jackass. Was it, master? Well, say you looks just like him. Got that nail. Misdirection, pretense, cryptic speech. In fact, a kind of homespun Socratic irony. As the above example demonstrates, loom prominently as characteristics of early authentic Black humor, and in many instances, these effects were achieved through the aberrations of African American speech, now recognized as resulting from the attempt to conform African patterns of speech to American ones. Special colloquial terms such as dig, bad, mean very good, and okay, for instance, have African prototypes that, according to many social scientists and linguists, are linked to their initial use by African Americans. Dig is derived from the Wolof deg or dega, to understand or appreciate. Bad, an example of the use of negative terms to describe positive attributes common in African languages, is associated with the Sierra Leone I good bod. It's very good. Okay. Although attempts have been made to establish a French or Greek source, it's probably derived from the Mandingo okay, or the Western Fula Ieke, both meaning yes, indeed. It is easy to understand how the slave use of a term such as bad to designate something desired might have conformed for non-blacks both the comic status and the ignorance of bondsmen. Comedian Red Fox expresses the irony of this miscommunication in a tale of an African learning to speak English from a white Southern tutor. Hey boy, bring that there yonder. Chuck it, nigga, chuck it. The African responds by saying, Oba Gooba, which he and other slaves know to mean chuck that shit yourself. Oba Gooba. As one analyst noted, the American Negro, more than most people, has had subtlety and irony forced upon his art. But other rhetorical devices were even more significant than the carryover of individual words. In addition to the dozens or mother rhyming and signifying or dissing, other prominent devices were call and response, tonal semantics, and indirection. Call and response, the extemporaneous interaction, the extemporaneous interaction between speaker and listener is most often associated with the Black church and musical performances, where the audience's uninhibited reaction to a speaker or musician indicates clear approval or condemnation of the rap or riff being presented. Excuse me. Where y'all at, boys? Time to come in the house. Excuse me. Hold on just 1 second. Y'all in the house? All right. Good job. You have to keep practicing. Keep practicing your backflips and you'll get them down. But be very careful when you're doing your backflips out there. Don't hurt your neck. I don't want you to hurt your neck. No, you did not break your neck. But calm down. What are you doing in here while I'm reading? All right. No, I just got started, son. The extemporaneous interaction between speaker and listener is most often associated with the Black church and musical performances, where the audience's uninhibited reaction to a speaker or musician indicates clear approval or condemnation of the rap or riff being presented. One visit to an Apollo theater, what did I tell you? One visit to an Apollo theater amateur night provides an instant, indelible demonstration of this phenomenon. For African Americans and their African ancestors, the device also allowed a form of subtle communication between two parties, in which a listener could express awareness of the veiled meaning of an assertion. This device, combined with tonal semantics, the practice of using voice intonation and altered speech rhythm to convey meaning, could and still does allow an overt remark or action to be transformed into veiled, undetected ridicule and satire, in which often only the participating parties are aware of the intent and purpose. Indirection, which employs suggestion and innuendo rather than direct, declarative statement, not only works hand in hand with the traditional African custom of expressing protest without confrontation, but also permits cloaked or disguised conversation that only initiates can decipher. Its use in Black humor is evident in the Pompey tale as well as in much of the humor of the classic Black comedians of the early 20th century. In the presence of slaveholders and other whites, these and other devices were not merely affections or instruments of disguise used solely to mask the critical intent of the slave humor. They were from the outset an integral part of the entire stylistic and substantive nature of Black humor. The particular circumstances of slavery, most obviously the adversarial relationship of Blacks and whites, undoubtedly influenced the frequency with which these devices were used and the often exaggerated manner in which they were displayed. In fact, they were in all probability used more often by slaves who truly succumbed to and identified with the notion that they were Sambos. But they also emerged as conspicuous characteristics of the dual consciousness that African Americans adopted to maintain a positive self-image while resisting white Americans' derogatory stereotypes. The difference between private and public Black humor during slavery was not just a matter of style, but also an assertive content, and even then, perhaps often just a matter of degree. Given the scantily inhibited humor openly revealed to whites, it takes no outrageous conjecture to imagine the derision that on occasion most have emerged behind closed doors with no inhibitions was required, when no inhibitions were required. And if we consider the doggedly subversive nature of Blacks' behavior in other areas, the routine sabotage of crops, destruction of tools and animals, work slowdowns, even occasional instances of protective infanticide, the wide scope of that humor is more apparent. Of course, very little of the original humor of the slave quarters has survived. The African American inclination towards secrecy, particularly with regard to uncensored expressions about whites, combined with the late entry of folklorists into the field of collecting slave folk humor, has left us with relatively few samples. Slave narratives, which have been much more rigorously collected, unfortunately offer few examples of slave humor, since collectors were apparently, and quite justifiably, more interested in the work routines, living conditions, and hardships of the subjects interviewed. But a considerable body of trickster and animal tales is available, and they provide what are perhaps the most revealing examples of a critical and often outer directed aggression of Black humor. Although, in customary African fashion, most of these tales are oblique and indirect. Still, piecing together available samples, a fragmented picture does emerge. Aphorisms and rhymes, most of which are focused on black slaves' day-to-day interests, reflect some of their pragmatic concerns and folk wit. Fiddling nigger say hits long way to the dance. Their proudness on a man don't count when his head's cold. Heap of people recollect favors by marking them down in the snow. I don't make much difference where the rain comes from, just so it hits the ground in the right place. The morning glories ain't particularly lumbly to a man waddle backache with the backache. The morning glories ain't particularly lovely. I guess that's lovely to a man with the backache. These examples reflect slaves' subtle and ironic acknowledgement of the hardships and injustice they face, the inequity of time allotted for labor and leisure, the fatal consequences of displaying an uppity or arrogant attitude, and conversely, the wisdom of feigned humbleness and worthlessness of promised rewards to slaves, and the eroding spiritual debilitation that occurs from unrelenting hard labor. Slave rhymes vary from the nonsensical and playful mocking of pretentiousness. The hairy ape now chilling, see, he's looking for a little old flea. If he should turn around, we find he has no hair on his behind. To veil protest of bondage, in which even death is seen as a preferable alternative. Old King Buzzard floating high, say, sure do wish that cow would die. Old cow died and a little calf cried, old mother, you shall be free. To the more insensitive ridiculing of white, and, as in the following example, even heavily justice. Our Father, which art in heaven, white man owe me 11 and pay me 7. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. If I had it tucked that, I wouldn't got none. Oh man. I'm laughing at what this slave saying says. A little bit. Trickster tales were among the most popular and commonly expressed varieties of slave folklore, and outside of physical resistance and rebellion, probably represented the most aggressive and cynical view of white America expressed by slaves. The animal variety of these tales was initially popularized in mainstream America by Joel Chandler Harris in the 19th century. Harris was a white journalist and humorist who, as a teenager during the 1860s, lived on a Georgia plantation and listened attentively to folk tales related to slaves. A complex and retiring man, self-conscious and shy, he was also an ambitious writer and an assertive commenter on social issues. His attitude toward African Americans was equally complex. During the early 1870s, his newspaper humor included jibes such as a lumpkin Negro seriously injured his pocket knife recently by undertaking to stab a colored brother in his head. Yet near the end of his career, he had his pseudonyms. Oh man, trying to see how you pronounce this. Let's see. Yes, I'm gonna look it up on my phone. Yes, well. Let's spell it. What letter do you see? What letter is that?
Is
Can you tell me? No, sir. DJ, come tell me the letter. Oh, he's not there. P. You want to start? P E. I mean P S.
yes.
P S
Is
E U
U
D O N Y
N Y
M
M
O S.
M O U S.
Pseudonyms.
Pseudonym.
Let's see how to pronounce it. Let's see how to pronounce it. Let's spell it. Let's see what it means.
Pseudonym. My foot in.
P S E U.
Drop my foot in.
Come on, man. Get your pick ahead. P S E U D O N Y. There you go. Let's see.
Pseudonymous.
Pseudonymous. Writing or written under a false name.
Pseudonymous.
Pseudonymous.
Pseudonym.
He had his pseudonymous rule philosopher, Billy Sanders, criticized the violent suppression of blacks. The retelling of the stories he had heard from elderly black slaves first appeared in the Atlanta Constitution, and when published in 1880 as Uncle Remus, his songs and his sayings became the immediate success. The tales were rendered nearly authentically. Harris's ear for the slave's quaint dialect was finely tuned and, in fact, so fanatically exacting that his version of the stories may be difficult for many modern readers to follow. The following line from the beginning of the wonderful Tar Baby story is illustrative. Brer Fox went to work and got in some tar and mixed it with some turpentine and fix up a catcher contraption, what he called a tar baby. And he turned this guitar baby sorta in the big road. And then he lay off in the bushes for to see what the news was gonna be. Much of that instant popularity resulted from Harris's creation of the character Uncle Remus. He good, a faithful darky type who relates stories to the young white child. In the introduction of these tales, Harris, who wrote that the slave's most prominent characteristics was their homely humor, insinuates that the portrayal of weaker animals such as the rabbit as heroes reflected some social awareness on the part of the slaves. If that's what you're going to do, move. DJ, take all that grass out your brother's hair. But he quickly rejected the idea of allegorical basis for the tales as unreasonable. The myth stories related by Uncle Remus for Harris, for example, of the shrewd observations and humorous philosophy of the race of which Uncle Remus was a type. And the fictional Remus character is an example of the slave who has nothing but pleasant memories of the discipline of slavery. He was, as one critic wrote, the ventriloquist dummy on Harris's knee. Uncle Remus, then, much like the protagonist of Harriet Beecher Stowe's popular novel Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, subtitled Life Among the Lowly in the 1900 Henry Altimus Children's Edition, is a fictional character who reflects an image of blacks popular among abolitionists during the mid-19th century and among black sympathizers after emancipation. Ironically, pro-slavery forces also subscribe to the characterization. since it supported their contention that blacks' dependency necessitated the institution of slavery. Now, to be sure, there were many docile, childlike, contented blacks who personified the fictional creations of Stowe and Harris. Stowe's character, Uncle Tom, for instance, is said to be partially based on the life of the Reverend Josiah Henson, a slave who, after his escape, became a minister and an active worker for the Underground Railroad. As a slave, however, Henson, according to his own testament, ostensibly epitomized the faithful servant who had internalized his master's view of blacks. The intention of Stowe and Harris, as well as other romantic rationalists or racialists, many of whom extolled the so-called Christian and feminine qualities of the Negro race, were in one sense commendable. But because they emphasized only one aspect of the slavery experience, their writings neither reflected the true nature of blacks in direct resistance to slavery, nor alluded to the vast number of slaves who presented a less obsequious and passive demeanor. In fact, the Uncle Remus character, when one considers the ironic thrust of the trickster theme in the animal stories he relates, seems primarily a fictional fabrication designed to establish a safe context in which the tales could be heard, thereby assuaging white anxiety and making the tales more accessible to and palpable for mainstream readers. Harris's fictional Remus also served to perpetuate the carefully fabricated myth of genteel plantation owners and contented slaves with nothing but fond memories of bondage, which was created by Southern writers after the Civil War. In themselves, these stories generally provide humorous portraits that are far less accommodating, like the Aesop fables, whose actual origins have been attributed variously to ancient Chinese, Babylonian, Egyptian, or African sources instead of the Greek slave, Aesop. Many of these African American animal tales depict the triumph of physical weakness, hypocrisy, mischievousness, trickery, and cunning over brute strength and guilelessness. Since the trickery theme is not exclusive to African culture, at one time there was some controversy over the original source of the tales, and as late as the 1968, a critic still insisted that the Negro dialect was but a supreme ruse. But it is now generally accepted that Harris's tales were based on Black American stories firmly based in the West African tradition of storytelling. One in which fables and tall tales provided entertainment but were also used for moral instruction and protest. The African jackal survived as the American fox. Arna Bontemps wrote, "The African hare is the American rabbit, and the African tortoise is the American dryland turtle or terrapin. The hyena, a common villain in the African tales, became the wolf in America, although the bear or fox was sometimes given that hapless role. Animals such as tigers, monkeys, and lions maintained their original identities. It was the rabbit, however, who commanded center stage in this galaxy of animal characters. And although Harris distorts the tale's social purpose and obfuscates their veiled intention by the unlikely circumstance of having them openly and guilelessly related to a white child, there is little doubt that it was this weak but crafty animal's ability to consistently outwit stronger, more powerful foes that accounted accounted for much of the humor and gratification the tales initially provided slaves. One of the persistent delusions of the slaveholder, I wonder if that's, it makes me think about Bugs Bunny. I wonder if that's where they got the Bugs Bunny, tale from. Mhm. As in Africa, trickster tales in the antebellum period, which means before the Civil War, which I learned another day, were required to entertain as well as provide moral instruction. But contrary to general beliefs, these tales did not always idolize the trickster. The animal in animal tales, the rabbit or hare, who could be mischievous, even arrogant and malicious, was occasionally tricked by weaker animals. This counter theme, which Joyner designates as the trickster out-tricked, accentuated another aspect of slave morality. For instance, in the traditional Harris version of the Tar Baby story, after Brer Fox succeeded in luring Brer Rabbit into attaching himself to the Tar Baby, Brer Rabbit escapes by using wit and deception. "I don't care what you do with me," Brer Fox sees, "so you didn't thrown me in that briar patch. Roll is me," Brer Fox sees, "but don't fling me into that briar patch." And after Brer Fox, convinced that the briar patch was the worst face he could inflict on the rabbit, frees Brer Rabbit and tossed him into the briar patch. Brer Rabbit escapes unharmed. Bread and brawn in the briar patch. Bread Fox. Bread and brawn in a briar patch. Brer Fox hollers before scampering off to safety. Charles Joyner relates another version of the tale culled from testimonies collected in the 1930s from former slaves of the All Saints Parish slave community in South Carolina. In this version, unlike the Harris tale, where the fox is clearly the villain, Bud Rabbit emerges as the scoundrel. During a drought, he conceals the whereabouts of the secret well from the other animals. When the rabbit's deception is discovered, the animals lure him to the Tar Baby. Before releasing him, they scold and reprimand him for his selfishness. Here, the moral is that hubris, boastfulness, and lying are traits that can be dangerous, even for the wily trickster. Other tales repeat this not uncommon sub-theme. The most famous is probably the story of the turtle and the hare, in which the slow-footed turtle, after wagering that he can beat Brer Rabbit in a fair race, dispatches his look-alike relatives along the race route, and at the finish line, to convince his rival that he won the contest, that he won the contest. Yes, sir. I'm almost done. I have 3 pages left. Yes, sir. 3 pages. In other tales from the All Saints community, Bud Rabbit is outwitted by Bud Partridge on several occasions. In one tale, he is tricked into having his wife decapitate him when he allows arrogance, greed, or lack of concern for fellow animals to dictate his behavior. In addition to their entertainment and didactic purposes, animal folk tales represented one dimension of the slave's artistic expression. As Joyner put it, in animal tales, they found the perfect vehicle to express those impulses, those often painful cultural truths, in the indirect and thus less painful way. Such indirection goes to the heart of African concepts of eloquence. When related as animal stories, The trickster tales can be shared with slave masters, as in the Remus tales, but the trickster theme also appears in stories involving interactions between slaves and their masters. These less veiled tales were usually told only among slaves since, as the following story illustrates, the tale is not symbolic but realistic. The hero is a slave, and the intent is obvious. Nehemiah, a clever slave who had a reputation for avoiding work with his wit and humor, had been transferred from one master to another because of his ability to outwit his owners. Then David Wharton, known as the most cruel slave master in Southwest Texas, heard about Nehemiah. He bought him and vowed to make that rascal work. The morning after Nehemiah was purchased, David Wharton approached him and said, "Now you are going to work, you understand? You are going to pick 400 pounds of cotton today." "Well, master, that's all right," answered Nehemiah. "But if I make you laugh, won't you let me off for today?" "Well," said David Wharton, who had never been known to laugh, "if you make me laugh, I won't only let you off for today, but I'll give you your freedom." "I'll declare, boss, said Nehemiah. "You sure is a good-looking man, and I'm sorry I can't say the same thing about you," retorted David Wharton. "Oh, yes, boss, you could," Nehemiah laughed out. "You could if you told them big a lie as I did." Now, Wharton could not help laughing at this. He laughed before he thought. Nehemiah got his freedom. Many examples of this type of trickery tale emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when former slaves were less concerned with maintaining the cloak of secrecy they had adopted about interactions with slaveholders. In them, John, sometimes Jack, Goliath, Pompey, or Nehemiah often cunningly outsmarted his master, securing access to better food or other rewards, foiling attempts at punishment for various indiscretions, forestalling some imminent calamity, or gaining his freedom. One story related by former All Saints Parish slaves concerns the master's attempt to kill John because of his cunning and trickery. Master takes John to the river and, intending to drown him, ties him in a sack. But he decides to eat dinner before killing him. While he is away, John hears a woman passing by and tells her he's going to heaven today. When she says she would like to go to heaven herself, John says, "I can go up any old day. I'll let you go in my place." She frees John and takes his place in the sack. Master returns and throws the sack into the river. Within a few days, John strolls back onto the plantation. "Morning, master," John says. "John, I thought I killed you." "Yes, Captain, you killed me. I've been all to heaven and come round by hell. The devil have these cows. Say he ain't want them. You want them? Drive them in the stable, John." "John, you know where my money?" "I know where your money was before I leave." "Well, you go get that money and spend it for anything you want." John became rich and a powerful man, although the price he paid was the sacrifice of an innocent woman. Another tale relates how Jack, the trickster, wins a swimming race without even getting into the water. Jack was a very wise nigga. Captain brag on Jack. Captain say Jack can beat all swimming. Then he come tell Jack, "Jack, tomorrow a man come and hit a swim with you. Want you to swim 2-3 miles. Want you to beat him. And I bet money on you. You must best him so we can get all the money." Now Jack can't swim nary lick. He go get him a stove, grits, meal, meat, and lard, and all, and putting on his back. "Man, come to swim with Jack," he say. "What you got that bundle for? I'm going swimming. Jack tell him, you think I'm going to swim these 4 miles that without any something to eat? You must think I'm a big fool. And the man, what come think of Jack going to swim so far, he have to stop and cook rations along the way. He better back down. Jack's captain got all that money. Trickster stories such as these are excellent examples of slave humor that also mirror themes that would resurface in black stage humor at the beginning of the late 19th century and survive in the acts of turn of the century comedy teams such as Florney Miller and Aubrey Lyles, Burt Williams and George Walker, as well as later in the antique television comedy of Kingfish on the Amos and Andy show in 1951, and Fred Sanford and Son in 1974. Another important source of humor, clandestine satire, and protest was the slave music and songs. Black sacred music, of course, seldom had any comic intent. Such instances occur only when sacred and secular themes are integrated. Spirituals, however, do provide numerous examples of veiled protest. For as with black secular music, slaveholders tolerated sentiments expressed in song that would have been considered insolent if expressed more directly. Beginning in the 18th century, white missionaries started attempting to change the slaves' pagan beliefs. They urged slaves to substitute constrained Christian religious practices for the far less inhibited heathen ceremonies they brought from Africa, and to replace the more expressive music associated with African religions with solemn Christian hymns. Black acculturation to Christianity continued throughout the antebellum period. Slaveholders variously exhorted slaves to conversion or legally forbade religious gatherings because of fear of slave arousal and insurrection, such as the abortive conspiracy instigated in Charleston by the slave preacher Denmark Vesey in 1822, and the Southampton, Virginia revolt led by Nat Turner, also a preacher in 1831. For similar reasons, black religious music was alternately encouraged and repressed. Slave spirituals, or sorrow songs, as they were called later, survived, however, and by the Civil War were being seriously collected and studied. By 1873, largely through the efforts of the Fisk Jubilee Singers, who began touring 2 years earlier, Negro spirituals had provoked international interest. For the outset, black religious practices as well as black sacred music, although greatly modified by European restraint and piety, maintained a distinctive non-European cast. Some versions of religious songs incorporated humorous, secular material, but humorous lyrics are naturally found much more readily in slave shouts and work songs. An earlier novel about plantation life in the late 18th century describes one variety of the slave shout, the so-called corn song, as being natural at expressions of kind and amiable feelings, such as praise of their master, gratitude for his kindness, thanks for his goodness, praise for one another, and now and then a little humorous satire. But these extemporaneous outbursts of song were not always as good-natured as this fictional account suggests. A report from the West Indies in 1804 provides the following description of slaves at work. Someone takes the lead and breaks out with a song, to which there is always a chorus. In this, they all join. These songs are not without their jibes. sometimes too leveled at the masters. Sometimes too leveled at the masters, and then they are sung with peculiar vivacity when the Negroes come under his window or near his house. I bet they was singing that thing like they was walking around the walls of Jericho, trying to make it fall. Although there are differences between the slave cultures that emerged in North America and those in the West Indies, there is no reason to believe that the description of improvised work songs or shouts, which reflects the African use of such songs, did not apply sometimes to the musical expressions of slaves in the United States as well. Again, for obvious reasons, few of those impromptu songs, in a real sense, the precursors of the blues, were recorded or documented. But a prominent musicologist submits that Black American work songs range in substance from the ribald to the devout, from the humorous to the sad, from the gentle to the bitter, and from the tolerant to the unforgiving. As throughout Negro singing generally, there is an incidence of social criticism, ridicule, gossip, and protest. Not surprisingly, among the secular slaves, songs that survived are some interesting examples of the irony and satiric thrust of slave humor. Mrs. in the big house, Mammy in the yard, Mrs. holding her white hands, Mammy working hard. Our old Marsh riding all the time, niggas working round. Marsh sleeping all day, niggas digging in the ground. John Morgan came to Danville and cut a mighty dash. Last time I saw him was under the whipping lash. I went to Atlanta, never been there afore. White folks eat the apple, nigga wait for the coat. I went to Charleston, never been there before. White folks sleep on feather beds, niggas on the floor. No more drivers lash for me. No more, no more. No more pit of salt for me. No more, no more. Many thousands go. No more 100 lash for me. No more, no more. No more mistress call for me. No more, no more. Many thousand go. Lawrence Gellert, Me and My Captain, in 1936, contains examples of African American folk lyrics that are even more aggressive in their ridicule of whites. Some scholars are suspicious of the song's origins, but many others readily accept their authenticity. These lyrics sometimes echo assertive jibes purportedly heard among West Indian slaves. My bossman's name is Sammy, the meanest dog I ever know. Speak soft, cause he got more ear sights than the devils down below. If I had my sweet way, Graveyard's place my bossman lay. I even hates to hear his name, could kill him like an express train. All the wrong, Captain, you do to me, bound to come back to you, wait and see. When it comes, white folks shows you I'm a man, not a no-tail monkey. What got rattling in his chain? The frequency with which these are sung, that is, the extent to which they enter into life, wrote one analyst, is of course unknown. But given the clandestine nature of slave life, it is not far-fetched to assume that such direct lyrics were whispered and sung in close quarters. Slave songs, along with all of the folk tales, rhymes, and animal stories and aphorisms that survived the antebellum period, can finally reveal only the surface qualities of Black bondsmen's private humor. They are merely ripples that suggest and sometimes vaguely delineate the ironic painfulness and underlying surge of defiance and outright mockery that would be discovered later in Black humor. The vast majority of the authentic humor of the slave quarters, unfortunately, remains hidden. The oral nature of Black culture, the secretiveness that became such an important part of the slave survival, and the inescapable reality of the consequences of overt satire or unveiled aggression assured that most slave humor appeared in the guise of misdirection and passivity, or was whispered and forever sealed in the dark recesses of slave shanties. But these early examples of slave wit, irony, and satire, however muted they may now seem, established the foundation for the tradition of humor that would survive bondage and emerge as a significant part of American culture and of Black American struggle for equality. After emancipation, just as the slaves were physically unshackled, their innermost thoughts also found, hey, wake up, man, wake him up, wake up. After emancipation, just as the slaves were physically unshackled, their innermost thoughts also found freer expression in a less restrictive and repressive environment. And the authentic character of the more aggressive, undisclosed humor of the slave quarters began to emerge. A clue to the nature and content of this veiled humor may be found in stories such as the following. The slave owner. Hey, dear, faithful, loyal Uncle Tom, Lincoln has forced you to accept freedom against my wishes, and I am sure against yours. Dear old friend and servant, you need not leave this plantation. Stay here with us. Kindly, gentle, self-sacrificing Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom. Thank you, dear, kind, loving, generous master. I reckon I'll leave, but before I go, I want you to know I will alas remember you is the son of a bitch. You is always was. You is and always was. And that was the end of chapter 1. The end of section 4, which makes the end of chapter 1, slavery, in On the Real Side by Mel Watkins. They had some little funny points at that part. You know, some of them slave shanties, songs, and stories. Hey, if I could get it right, they'll still have a kick today. Still have its kick. But that's it before the Sabbath comes in. It's almost here. So we'll come back in the next section and start chapter 2, minstrelsy, the die cast. Minstrelsy. The die is cast. But that'll be for the next section. The next session of Reading with SHILO. Thank y'all, man. I hope y'all enjoy it. Man, we all come in, like, comment, leave a comment, subscribe if you want to. All that stuff free. It'll show help the growth of the channel. And get some of these books that people might not have heard out to other people. Let me see how long chapter 2 is. Wake up, man. I'm done. DJ, wake up. I'm done. Y'all get up. Y'all get up. 2's not as long as 1, but we'll get it. Once again, 1 page at a time, 1 day at a time, till we finish eating this big old monster right here, man. Till we finish eating this big old monster. Ooh, you look hot, boy. You look hot. Y'all sweating. But until next time, everybody, shalom. SHILO out. We'll catch up with you the next go round.